Hello, my name is Tyronda Boone. I am a mother, a daughter, an educator, an entrepreneur, and the director of the documentary Generational Wealth, Triumphs and Tribulations. In this documentary, I delve into the compelling story of two African American families growing up in the Jim Crow South. This narrative is both engaging and thought-provoking. These profound themes are illuminated through the lens of my parents' lives from the not-so-distant past. As a child, I traveled all across the United States from the back seat of my parents' car and listened to them talk about how they grew up. I was immersed in tales of prosperous Black communities where there were wealthy African Americans who owned land and had thriving businesses. Conversely, I listened to stories of individuals courageously advocating for equal rights, as well as reflections of growing up in poverty simply because of the color of your skin. They also describe the unsettling presence of domestic terrorists who inflicted fear upon the community. Despite the weight of these stories, they didn't breed hate in me. Instead, they instilled me with a profound sense of hope and inspiration. These narratives fueled in me the desire to create a legacy that surpassed my ancestors' wildest dreams. Through these tales, I discovered a deep love of history and the invaluable lessons it imparts, particularly in learning from the grave errors of the past. These stories inspired me, and I hope they inspire you. Now, I present to you Generational Wealth, Triumphs and Tribulations. After Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation to save the Union, African American men and Union soldiers met to discuss the best ways America could help the newly freed African Americans reach the American dream. The request was for land that can be cultivated using a skill they have already mastered and then passed on to the next generation. Some African Americans did receive the promise of 40 acres and a mule. However, to most African Americans, this promise was not kept. In 1877, there was the Great Compromise. During the Great Compromise, the Union soldiers, who were protecting the newly freed African Americans, left the South, and the Ku Klux Klan began their reign of terror. After the Civil War ended, the Confederate soldiers returned to the South and wanted their land back. Once again, they made empty promises to the newly freed African Americans, saying that they would treat them fairly if they sharecropped or became tenant farmers. Due to these promises, many African Americans decided to stay in a land they had known all their lives. This decision, sadly, would have a lasting impact on the wealth of African Americans and their families, and this impact can still be felt today. While tenant farmers had the opportunity to grow some wealth as they owned their equipment, sharecroppers found themselves in crushing debt to the landowner year after year. And so today, we're going to hear first-hand accounts of what it was like to grow up in the Jim Crow South. Our guest, Luther Boone, who grew up as a sharecropper in North Carolina, and Lula Boone, who grew up as a tenant farmer in Georgia, will share their experiences and teach us more about the impact of sharecropping and tenant farming. In order to know where we're going, it is important to understand where we've been, as many of us find ourselves in a cycle of crushing debt. Today, let's use their stories to inspire us to grow our generational wealth and live the lives that our ancestors dreamed.
I was born December 7th, 1948, the third of three sons. My mother's name was May Lizzie Boone, the daughter of Vassie May and James Bonham. My father was Sherman Boone, who was the son of Clara Bynum and Archie Boone. The social climate from where I'm from where my hometown was, it was non-existent. I mean, you enjoyed yourself by community. It was a tight community, and everyone looked out for everyone else. The people in my community that must be respected were the preachers, the police, and your parents. That was a group of people that was most respected in our neighborhood. Parents, preachers, and the adults. You must respect the adults. Sharecropping was a system that replaced slavery after the Civil War. When slavery was abolished, sharecropping was the system that replaced it. Slaves had to work as sharecroppers and share their bounty with the landlord, who was the only one who kept records. The slaves couldn't keep records. If you kept records, that means that you questioned the integrity of the landlord. And that's something that you did not want to do unless you want to find yourself homeless, looking for another place to farm. The sharecropper had no say-so. So what the landlord did was he took everything and gave the sharecroppers nothing. So at the end of the year, the children and the parents worked the land mostly for free. The landlord would go through the book and he would point out how much we owed him, but he would never get to the part where he owed us. So every year, my father would never make any money. He would always come out in the hole. So he couldn't leave not on him. So every year, same story. I don't care how much we made, or how bountiful the crop was, the results was nothing. When I asked my dad of why we never made any money, and my father used to say, son said, you talk too much. You just don't understand. Because he had no power. He had to do that just for us to have food and a place to live. He had to become a slave to defend his and provide for his family. So slave was treated like the sharecroppers. None of them, they was treated very bad. I mean, they had no rights to nothing, not even to live, because they would hang them whenever they got ready. The landlord, which was the owner of the land that was that was our homeland before colonialism came into play. But when colonialism came into play, our land was taken away and given to the immigrants. They came over and they became our landlord, the world. So we worked for them, and they just shared the bounty with us. Well, it was, they had no respect for the sharecroppers. The sharecropper that my father farmed for, Mr. World, he had a habit of kicking his sharecropper, kicking his slaves. I mean, he would just walk up to him and kick him. But he never kicked my father, but he did everything but kick. I remember my father, he took a load of corn to the corn mill early that morning. The landlord came to the house looking for my father, knowing that my father had gone to Como. Mr. World got to the house. He asked my mother, well, May Lizzie, where is Sherman? My mother replied, he went to Como to take a load of corn. And he said, went to Como? And my mother said, yeah, he went to Como. And my mother got a little upset because she knew what it was about. They was on the verge of quitting, stop farming, and they needed us to move, but that was his way of getting us to move by picking a fight with my mother. He told my mother, said, if you don't shut up, I'm gonna get out of this car and whoop you. My mother dared him out of the car. And as I stood by her side, he drove off. He was red, he was cursing, he was just furious. But he didn't press the issue because my mother was waiting on him. Well, the world of the landowners was the landlords. They was our landlords. They was given our land to have us work. And we had no say so. I was born in a house that was built on my ancestor's grave. And when the last member of my family that lived in this house, the landlord told them, y'all can have the house, but you can't have your burial ground. That was the burial ground. I was born in a house that was built on the burial ground of my fourth great-grandparents, Mary Boone and John Everett. My grandfather, he was a comedian. I mean, everybody liked him. He only went to the third grade, but he was the veterinarian. Every animal that got sick, they would come to get him to doctor the animals. I mean, he was known for his ability to work with animals. And he was a comedian, and the ladies that was part of the family that owned the little store that he shopped at, they used to like him because he was funny. He used to make them laugh, but the husband of the women didn't like that. So they went to the landlord, Mr. Bryant, that my grandfather farmed for. My aunt was telling me she was about 6 years old when they went to hook up the mule for them to go to the field. And the landlord came to my grandfather and said, James, so the ladies down at the brickyard, like you, but the men don't like you. So if they decide to kill you, I'm gonna have to happen. And this was a man who great-grandfather annexed Lizzie Warren land and made them cooks and farmers on their own land. They had no rights on their own land. And when my grandmother died, she was born in 1902. She died in 1980. When she died, They told my grandfather and my sisters, my three sisters, that they cared for after my mother passed in '65. They told them that, look, since Vassie, she had inherited rights on that farm because the farm belonged to her ancestors, the Native American ancestors, Lizzie Warren and the Warrens. The land belonged to them before it was annexed by the Europeans during colonialism. They told her, said, since you are the last one of the Warren to have birthrights to their own land. So we lost our birthright to our own land. We had no birthrights. We had no land. We had nothing. When I got old enough to go to the store by myself, because I was turned 6 a little late to start school in '54. So I started school in '55. When I got old enough to go to the store by myself, because I was turned 6 a little late to start school in '54. So I started school in '55 when I was almost 7. Well, from 4 to 6 years old, I was old enough to go to the store by myself, okay? You know, whenever I found a couple of pennies, I would go and buy them 2-for-penny cookies. And Mr. Joe Britt, he owned the country store. And when I would go to the store and buy some cookies, he would spit in his hands or on the floor, or wash his hand in his spit before he would handle my bare cookies with his dirty hands. And I didn't know anything better. All I wanted was the cookies. Spitting in his hand, you know, it didn't register to me until I got older. And then I was saying, what? This old man, I mourned his death the night that he died. I was trying to get to the store the day before then to get some of the cookies, and I saw him crossing the street. The sun set, he crossed the street, so I had missed the chance to get the cookies. And he died that night, and I mourned this man's death after spitting in my cookies. We had to say yes, yes, ma'am, and no, sir, and yes, sir, and yes, ma'am. You know, my grandfather, who was born in 1900, and my sister, who was born in 1964, had a playmate who was a granddaughter of the landowner. They was about the same age. She called my father, who was born in 1917, Sherman. But when my sister called her father Bootsy, she wanted to know why my sister didn't say Mr. Bootsy. So we had to say Mr. to them, and they just called us by our first name. Segregation was the way of life. You could not look the landlord in the eye. You could not go to a school that was equipped to educate. Sharecroppers, as a child, I went to school every day until I got to the 3rd grade. The 3rd grade, school became secondary. Sharecropping was the #1 priority. The only time I went to school after I reached the 3rd and 4th grade was when it was raining. Otherwise, my duty was in the field. My father would cut off a hoe that was used to cultivate for a child to teach us how to get the weeds out of cotton, peanuts, soybeans, and corn. So the education in school after the 3rd grade was a pipe dream. Only education that I got was through dreams, wondering how I was going to make it, or wondering how I can solve this problem. So I've spent most of my time dreaming just to escape the horrors and that came with sharecropping. I mean, it was hard work. If you thought about the hard work, it was, you had nothing coming. But I used to escape the hard work and live. I used to dream all the time. I used to get by myself, work and get by myself and just dream about how I'm gonna do this, or how I'm going to be the best at this, or how I'm going to be the best. I just wanted to be. I couldn't stand being second class. I couldn't stand that. That used to eat me up. We went to school in September when school started. We registered, but it was cotton picking time. So regardless, you didn't get too young to pick cotton. You didn't get too young to pick cotton. You picked cotton as if you could walk and pull that cotton out of that bowl. That's where you was at, in the field with your mother, with your parents. Now, when it came to education after the third grade, I spent from September to December, first week in December, in the field. We had corn, cotton, peanuts, and then we had to harvest. That was between September and December. Well, come April, it was time for planting. May, we was back in the field. So we had part of December, January, February, March, 4 months that we went to school regular. But the rest of the time, summer vacation, out of the window. We had no break during the summer. We got out of school, we stayed in the field until December. My biggest problem was not being able to go to school. At one point, as a child, I thought it would be better if I went to jail. I would have got a better education in jail than I would as a sharecropper. But my mother told me, said, son, what you're looking for is not on that school bus. She said, what's on that school bus belongs to the school bus. They give it to you and they can take it away. But she said, what you learn from this experience is the only thing that you will ever own in your life. You have to create it yourself. Nobody can give you justice. Nobody can give you freedom. Nobody can give you anything. The only thing you can claim is what you make yourself. My first grade teacher, who was my grandfather's first grade teacher, was our cousin. She gave me, she showed me a lot of attention. She worked with me, but after that, the rest of the teachers, they cared, but it was nothing they can do for me because, I was so far behind. It would have took too much of their time to catch me up. So they just watching me sitting, and I did what I could, as far as what I had to go on. But, I never flunked the grade. But a D and a C was good for me. I got a couple of B's and a couple of A's in geography and science. But that was about it. And in 12th grade, the low point of my education was in the 12th grade. We were sitting in there, and my trigonometry teacher, who never even paid me any attention, the spring of my senior year, he said, he put a problem up on the board and said, involved a flagpole, a dog with a rope tied around his neck. The rope was a certain length. So what he asked me, he said, if the rope on the dog was long enough for his nose to touch the shadow of the ball on that flagpole, what time was it? I knew that. I knew it was 12 o'clock, but I didn't know the equation. So I just stood there. And he said, well, Boone said, I thought at least you would know that one since we're talking about a dog. The difference between the white school bus and the colored school bus, that was during harvest time, the white school bus was full. I mean, it was having a ball. But when the colored school bus passed, there was only a few students because most of us was in the field. That reflected two different worlds, the have and the have-nots. Well, when I graduated from high school in 1967, I had signed up for the Air Force. in high school. So I was, before I went to the Air Force, I left home. I graduated from school, and we was standing out, me and my friends, we was one more gathering before we separated. We was standing at the Tasty Freeze in Murfreesboro, North Carolina. And some college students from Balkans came up, and they had a white cross out of paper. And they stuck the cross out of the window, and they lit it. And they said, all I hear is not a member of the KKK, is a black you know what. And one of them grabbed me in the collar, and I did what I had to do to him, but then I ran because I didn't want to get into trouble, because I know what the law, the militia, Murfreesboro militia, was the same militia that Captain Nat Turner in my family church. So I know what they did. When the cops came, they was only looking for the blacks who had been assaulted by the whites. I hid in the swamp in Murfreesboro, North Carolina. That was the deepest inland port where slaves was transported up the Roanoke Chowan River Valley and was sold in Murfreesboro, North Carolina. And the place that they were selling them at, I hid in that swamp until the cops stopped looking for the blacks who was assaulted by the whites. And I left there with $3.75 in my pocket and the clothes on my back. The Great Migration started in the early 19th century, where my great aunts and uncles was migrated to the north. My uncle Willie, my cousin Willie, he was the son of my aunt Molly, who was the sister of my grandmother. They lived up here on Minnesota Avenue, Sheriff Road, and he would come to see them. But he said he'd catch the train, but when he got to Richmond, they had to get off the train, walk around Richmond, and catch the train again when it left Richmond, to come north, because the people in Richmond had rubber hoses nailed to broomsticks, and if they caught them on the train, they would beat them. So they couldn't ride through Richmond. They had to get off and walk around Richmond, because Richmond was notorious for abusing blacks. The lesson I learned from the spit in my cookies was carried me throughout my military and civilian career. I mean, I was under constant bombardment. They tried to fire me at least 50 times from the time that I joined military back in 1968 until I retired from the federal government in 2011, because I stood for justice, and justice wasn't in the military. There was nothing justice about the military. The military was right-wing ran. The only justice I got from the military was getting the senior JAG office of AFDW fired for covering up more than 300 investigations and denying more than 300 people the right to counseling, which is their right. And they denied me my right to counseling for 42 years. The first counseling I got was by Chappie James, the general of 72, 72nd Fighter Training Wing in North Africa. He told me, he said, Boone said, let me tell you something. We are fighting two wars. One on foreign soil and one on our native land, and we're gonna win both of them. So that set me on the journey in 1969 to complete my goal in 2011 by getting to the bottom of hate and why, and how useless hate is, especially in the military when we're supposed to be fighting as a unit. I feel good about my career. I feel good about my accomplishment, but I'm still working on justice.
Jerome, how old are you?
9.
9. Do you go to school?
Yes.
Where do you go to school, Jerome?
I did it over Children Elementary School.
I see. What is your sister's name?
Lois,
That's Lois. And what are your other sisters' names?
Catherine, and Beulah.
Catherine and Beulah. What happened to your foot, Jerome?
Dig a nail in out there by the wash house.
So you drove a nail in out by the wash house. What did your mother do for that?
She put some alcohol on it
Where do you sleep, Jerome?
in his bed.
You have this big bed?
Yes.
What happened? How did you get that hole in that bed there, Jerome?
The rats.
The what?
Rats.
Now, Jerome, you are taking care of Kathy, of Beulah, and Lois.
Yes.
Now, are you going to give them lunch today?
Yes.
What are you going to feed them?
I don't know.
Do you have any food here to give them?
Yes.
I see. What time does your mother come home?
I don't know.
The following day, Arlene King, the mother of Jerome, Kathy, Lois, and Beulah, again was picking beans.
Aileen King, I saw your children yesterday at the Okeechobee camp. Why didn't you put them in the nursery?
I don't make enough to pay for it.
How much does it cost to put them in?
85 cents.
85 cents.
That's right.
Aileen, what time did you come out the field this morning?
6 o'clock.
What time will you get home?
About 3:30, 4 o'clock.
6 this morning to 4 o'clock this afternoon.
That's right.
How much did you earn?
$1.
$1?
That's right. $1.
Is that because the beans were of poor quality?
That's right.
Has this happened before?
That's right.
How much will your food cost you today?
About $2.
Aileen, how old are you?
29.
How many children do you have?
14.
How old were you when you first started working in the fields?
8.
You've been working 21 years in the fields?
That's right.
Aileen, do you ever think you'll be able to get out of this kind of work?
No, sir.
According to the National Bureau of Economic Research, at the beginning of the 20th century, the average farm worker earned approximately $14 a day. During that same time, the USDA cites that land was around $20 an acre. According to Forbes magazine, generational wealth is more attainable through real estate than most people even realize. If sharecroppers did not face so much discrimination, who knows how much generational wealth they could have amassed for their families?
My name is Lula Boone. My maiden name was Lula Lawson. My father was Virgil Lee Lawson, and my mother's name was Eva Mae Lawson. And my father was adopted. I never knew my biological grandfather because my grandmother adopted him at age of 3. And the way that came about was they used to call it going, when they went shopping, they used to call it going to town on Saturday. And normally, there was no problems or anything. They would make their trip, to where they was going to shop and come back. But this particular Saturday, their car ran hot, and they was out like in the middle of nowhere, and they looked and they saw this house where they could maybe get some water to put in their car. And when they approached the house, there was this lady there with these 3 girls and this one little boy. which was 3 years old, which was my father. And he had this great big burn on his leg. And my grandmother looked at him and she said, because he was all dirty and nasty, and she looked at him and said, "Can I have this little boy?" And my dad's mom said, "If you take all of them." And so she did. She took the 3 girls and the little boy, and she adopted them. My father was a tenant farmer because growing up as a child, my father told us that his father would never sharecrop. There was times something happened on the farm, and there was a disagreement, I guess. And the sharecropping, I guess, issue came up. But my grandfather would never sharecrop. So my dad told us that he would pack up everything they had on a wagon, a mule and a wagon, and they would ride until they come up on a farm where the hood was the owner of the farm would let them tenant farm. I was able to go to school because I went to live with my grandparents when I turned 6 years old. And so they had moved to the city at that time. And so that's where I lived. And that's where I would spend the first and the second grade when I went to live with my grandparents. But then when I came back home to live with my parents, I went to this school and I had to walk to school every day and walk back home, and it was so far. It was a long distance away. And one evening, this little girl walking. I'm on my way home. It's in the summertime. There was a line of trees, and I saw all these snakes. I just turned around and went down the right side and just went on home. And I didn't even tell Mom or nothing about it because I was used to snakes. My mom would get up every morning to go to church, and she would leave us change for me and my 2 sisters to get some off this truck that they had come by called a rolling stone. And I think I must have been about 7, and my sister under me about 5, and my other sister was 3. And we looked down the street and we see this procession coming. At that time, we didn't know what they were, but later on, I learned that they was Ku Klux Klansmen. And we had never seen nothing like that before. We lived in an all-black town. We went to school with blacks. We played with blacks. And so we didn't have to deal with the stuff that people have to deal with today, racism and all of that stuff. We didn't have to deal with that. We didn't know any difference. We went to movies and they had the black side and the white side. So we didn't never come in contact with the white side. And so we didn't even know nothing like racism existed at that time. Yeah, we knew black people, they were wealthy. They had cars and lived in big houses, and we lived in a big house also. And, my mom and them, they had cars, and my dad had a truck, and, we had, we raised our food, hogs and chickens and stuff like that, until when the man that we lived on the property, he come in and wanted to sharecrop, but my dad wouldn't have it. If my dad had decided to sharecrop, I know our lives would have changed, and my mom would have had to work out in the fields, and she wouldn't have been able to go out and work out. My dad wouldn't have been able to go out and work after he done gathered all his crops and stuff like that. He would have had to go out and work for them, and we wouldn't have nothing. We would have nothing.
In 1934, the Southern Tenant Farmers Union was founded by Harry Mitchell and Clay East. This interracial group of farmers appealed to their local, state, and federal government agencies to treat tenant farmers and sharecroppers with the respect they deserved. This was dangerous work, with many union members being assaulted, evicted, and much, much worse. The story of the Southern Tenant Farmers Union shows us what is possible when we all come together and fight for equal rights.
We met at Roberts Air Force Base in the club called Club 50. It was on a Thursday night. My cousin and I was already in the club, and Luther and his friends came in.
Yes, I got the Warren Robins Air Force Base 1st of October 1971. I met Lula soon after.
Yeah,
I got there, and
January.
Her name was Lula Mae Boone, and my mother's name was Mae Lizzie Boone. So, the initial was there. So, we hit it off real nice.
Watching my dad run his own business made me want to do the same thing when I grew up. And today I own my own business.
The first thing my mother taught me was about my purpose. She said she had been praying for 9 months, asking God to allow her to give birth to a warrior. That's what she told me. And she said the reason why she named me Luther was the fitting name to what she wanted me to be. The first thing that I saw outside from my mother was I used to cry. I used to cry every time my father left to go to work. And she took me to the field where my father worked. Must have been about 18. I was just beginning to walk good. And my father was out there plowing. It was in the spring of the year, 1949. He was plowing, getting ready for crop. And I can remember her putting me down. And I was walking across this field of this freshly plowed dirt. And birds were swooping down, getting worms as I was struggling trying to get to my father. I never forget that scene, the birds. And my father was plowing behind a mule with a single plow. And the image that just burned into my psyche, I can never forget that, because he was just like the past history of slavery. And I never forget that. And from that point on, I resisted being the oppressors who oppressed my people. And when I graduated from high school, I didn't want nothing but justice. I didn't want no education. I want justice. Anything that seemed like injustice, they had a problem with me. The main thing I want people to learn is there's no difference in the color. It's the content that makes the difference, whether the product is good or bad. And I'm here to let the young people know that regardless of where you find yourself at, or what you have on your mind, or what you're doing, just remember the Lord and justice and the truth. Faith, justice, truth, and courage is all you need in determination. You got to have that will. My mother told me, she said, wherever there's a will, there's a way. And out of every dark cloud, regardless of how dark the cloud gets, it's a lesson you can learn from it. And the lesson is a silver line that you should take from that dark cloud. Find that silver lining. Find what benefits you. Find what makes you tick. Find what it takes to overcome, and never yield to nothing but the Lord.
Poverty in Black America. Below the surface of America's trillion-dollar economy, there are inequalities between men and women, age, education, but the largest inequality is skin deep. The largest creators of wealth in America have been Black people. For 246 years, enslaved Africans created the wealth for their owners, a wealth that whites still profit from today. Since its inception, the U.S. economy has had two realities, one Black and one white. The structural barriers put in place before the Civil Rights Movement still affect Black Americans of today. Let's look back at some of these barriers. Black Wall Street. In 1905, Ottawa Gurley purchased 40 acres of land in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and named it Greenwood after a town in Mississippi. His vision for a place of upward mobility for Blacks led his plan to subdivide land into residential and commercial lots. Greenwood soon became an epicenter of wealth, education, and advancement for doctors, lawyers, and realtors, and built an economy valued at $5 million today. Booker T. Washington dubbed Greenwood Negro Wall Street, and in 1921, a two-day massacre destroyed this town. The race riot killed over 200 African American residents and just 50 white Americans. Ottawa and other drivers of economic growth lost the bulk of their fortunes. The total property loss amassed $2 million and left 10,000 African Americans homeless. Federal Housing Administration. In 1934, the FHA introduced policies that prevented African Americans from buying homes in specific neighborhoods by dividing cities into A, B, C, or D classifications, which institutionalized racism and segregation. This tactic, called redlining, denied home ownership loans based on race and ethnicity. This discouraged the possibility of investment in Black home ownership. This clause went on until the 1968 Fair Housing Act was established. Today's facts. While the U.S. government has played a huge role in our racial wealth gap, so have U.S. banks. African Americans have faced subprime mortgages with exploitive higher interest fees by big banks including Bank of America and Wells Fargo. In 2008, Cleveland sued 21 of our nation's largest banks for violating fair housing laws by singling out African Americans with subprime mortgage loans to people who could never repay. Home ownership among whites is 28% higher than that of Blacks. 2/3 of Black Americans are clustered in the 16 states that perform the lowest in economic output, education, and healthcare outcomes. On average, the net worth of a typical white family is nearly 10 times greater than that of a Black family. 20% of African Americans fall below the poverty line, and the wealth of African Americans is 17 times less than white Americans.
So now we have a deeper understanding of what happened to sharecroppers and what happened to tenant farmers. And I'm sure their stories ring true and are very similar to the stories of the elders in your families. And these stories must be shared because not only do they help explain race relations, but the wealth gap in our country. Sharecropping did nothing but help the wealth gap between Black and white Americans grow. We need to learn from this history as it highlights the importance of ownership. And when comparing tenant farmers to sharecroppers, tenant farmers had a little more power because they owned their own equipment. Ownership is the key to success. We must teach our young people about ownership, owning their own homes, their own businesses, so they have more control of their future. We must teach them the importance of having multiple streams of income, as this is a way that many people have attained wealth. And also, the consumer mindset must be replaced with the producer mindset. It's time for us to be paid what we are worth, because we are the trend setters. It is time for us to be paid for the trends that we have set. We must model this new empowering behavior for our youth because they are watching us. We should use our buying power to purchase things that are going to appreciate in value and leave a fiscal legacy for our family and community. We should stop saving just to spend, just to buy expensive cars and shoes. We must save for our financial future so we can live the life that we deserve and we are not tied down because of debt. Be inspired to grow your money like never before. Talk to your friends and family so you all can hold each other accountable. And remember, there's nothing wrong with having fun and spending money. However, there is something wrong with leaving your family in more debt because you passed away without a life insurance policy or an estate plan. It has been said that a people can perish from the lack of knowledge. So please share the information you learned today with him, your brother, your son, your uncle, your cousin. Share the information you learned today with her, your niece, your daughter, your granddaughter, your friend. And let the stories of the sharecroppers and tenant farmers inspire you to create generational wealth for your family. Generational Wealth, Triumphs and Tribulations has come to an end. Throughout this journey, we've delved into a few reasons for the significant wealth gap in the United States. Sharecropping emerged after the Civil War, and the practice has been likened to modern-day slavery. As highlighted in the documentary, there is evidence that sheds light on the perils that the sharecroppers faced when trying to leave the system. For instance, if the landowner to whom the sharecropper was supposedly indebted discovered the sharecropper's desire to leave and seek a better life, it was not uncommon for that sharecropper to face arrest, assault, or even worse, death. In those instances, ask yourself, what would you do? Would you stay in a system of perpetual debt in order to keep your family safe? Because leaving and exiting that system was an arduous and dangerous task for sharecroppers. They kept them trapped in a mentality of fear and servitude. With that in mind, I can't help but wonder what would have happened to the sharecropper if they were appreciated and compensated for their abilities rather than marginalized due to the color of their skin or socioeconomic status during the Jim Crow era. I am almost positive that if my father's family had the ability to save and earn money like my mother's family, it would have had a significant impact on our generational wealth. And when looking at that thriving all-Black town, I couldn't help but notice the pride on the faces of the people living in that community. That town thrived with businesses and that Black gold from that oil rig. But sadly, like Tulsa, like Colfax, like Wilmington and Rosewood, many Black towns were destroyed by our very own homegrown terrorists. Will justice ever prevail? Well, there is something that you and I can do. We can celebrate their memories by sharing their stories and recognizing the events and establishing a legacy that honors them. I fulfill multiple roles, of course, as a mother, a daughter, an educator, filmmaker, and entrepreneur. Although most of my time is dedicated to raising my wonderful daughter, Zoe, I do dedicate a significant amount of time to teaching young people financial literacy. I am committed to empowering them with the essential knowledge necessary to build a bright financial future. And if you desire to help me create Generation Debt Free, please contact me. I would love to have your support because we are stronger together. My love, and dedication to financial literacy was most likely sparked during those times I sat in the back seat listening to my parents talk about how they grew up. Those are invaluable lessons, and I gained inspiration from those stories. So Mom and Dad, I want to thank you for instilling in me the passion to guide the community towards financial empowerment. And to you, audience, thank you for joining me today. You being a part of this documentary is deeply meaningful to me and my family. Your interest and active engagement mean a great deal. And it is my genuine desire that these stories and experience shared in this documentary will resonate with you and inspire you. The first-hand accounts of the narratives of my family members encapsulate the enduring power of the American dream, which was not accessible to everyone. And those people denied access to the American dream are still a part of our community today. May this documentary serve as a motivation to your life and for you to live your life to the fullest and show kindness to everyone, no matter the color of their skin, their socioeconomic status, or how they may be different from you. And lastly, may you be able to access all of your dreams. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye.